Okay, in this video, which I'm doing it for the third time, I'm going to show you how to create the ZDAP, okay, to be embedded with the beauty pass render. Now, normally when you guys hit render, you'll be rendering the entire image with all the settings, with the lights, textures, and all of that. But we want to create a ZDAP so that we can adjust the focal distance of this scene here, right? So what is the ZDAP? So first, let me just go to the render settings here by clicking here and go under the AOVs, click on Z, and then click on this double-headed arrow to activate the rendering of the ZDAP. All right, now go over to the drop-down menu here and you can click on select driver, and then if you go over to the attribute editor, you can enable merge AOV. You can also enable merge AOV under the common tab here to enable it. All right, so now we want to test render a single frame, so I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call it ZDAP embedded. All right, and it's going to be rendered into my instructor images folder, and I'm not going to render so many frames. For your project, you're going to render 150 frames, but for this test, I'm just going to render a single frame. All right, so make sure you get these settings done. So once you have the settings done, we can open up the Arnold, open Arnold render view. Right, so go ahead and hit the play button here to just render a preview of the image. Okay, so once you are done rendering the preview, you can wait for the rendering to stop. At this moment, the video screen will freeze. Okay, but right now I'm not doing anything. I'm just waiting for the render to finish. Okay, then move your cursor over the red button and then just hit the stop button to stop the rendering if you think the quality is good enough. So I'm going to click on stop. Alright, so now it's not rendering in the background now, so I think the video should still continue right now at this moment. So I think the previous two videos, right, it will freeze here and you will not see what I'm doing. So hopefully you can see my cursor moving now, and I'm going to move over the box that says beauty. I'm going to click on the drop down and then I'm going to click on Z. Okay, so this is the resulting ZDAP image. So if you don't see anything, that means you have to adjust the exposure by going to this aperture symbol here, and then you can slide it down. Now, depending on your setup, right, the values that you adjust will be different. Okay, for my case, right, I have to go way down below -5. I have to bring it down to -13. So you have to manually key in this value. You have to troubleshoot until you get a contrast value that you think that will give you a depth distance or depth difference. Okay, so as explained before, the ZDAP, right, the ZDAP image allows you to control which image will be in focus and which image will not be in focus through the use of this grayscale image. Now, the white, extreme white, can represent everything out of focus or everything in focus, and the darker value can represent things in focus. Like in this case, we can specify the white area to be in focus and the darker areas to be out of focus. All right, and you can actually flip these values in a compositor. So this looks good to me, and now we are ready to render. And to prevent the video from freezing again, I'm going to close this renderer, and then we're going to go to our render settings, and I'm just going to lower down the renderer samples so that I can render this fast for test purposes, but for your final render you want to push this back to 3222. Okay, and then now we can do our render. So to render, make sure you go to rendering and make sure you set the name so that you can find the file, and make sure you're rendering it in EXR. So go and click on render sequence. I'm going to double check again, make sure you're rendering the correct camera, and make sure that you are rendering under your common settings the correct camera view. Sometimes your view might not be correct, you might render the wrong view. Just go and check that your the render view, make sure that render view, the camera, the current camera is correct as well. Okay, so I'm going to do a test render here. Okay, it is good enough, so I'm going to press escape to stop it. Okay, so now you have to press escape a few times to stop the render. Okay, so right now the rendering is still happening. Okay, now the rendering has stopped. So if you want to render the ZDAP image, you have to use, okay, for some reason my rendering has not stopped yet. Let me go over here and see whether I can press escape to stop it. Okay, it's stuck rendering at 10%, so I'm going to assume that it has stopped. So I'm going to do a render sequence, render sequence, and then click on render sequence and close. Okay, I'm going to pause the recording. Okay, so pause is Control Shift F5. It's gonna temporarily stop the recording. Okay, so resuming the recording. So now I got my image rendered through the render image sequence. So let's go and bring it into After Effects and see whether we can extract the ZDAP information from this image. Alright, so let's open up After Effects. Okay, I'm just going to search for it. After Effects, where is it? Okay, so I'm going to click on a new composition. New composition, I'm going to create a HDTV 108025 comp. And I'm going to right mouse click and import. Right mouse click and import the file, which I've rendered. Okay, so the file that I've rendered is called the ZDAP embedded.exr. I'm going to import it in. You can also drag and drop from the File Explorer. So to bring the image into the viewer here, just drag and drop it into the comp. And we're going to create two layers here. So press Ctrl D to duplicate. So the top layer, we're going to call this ZDAP. So I'm going to rename it. I'm going to call it ZDAP. And the bottom layer, I'm going to call it beauty pass. Right mouse click, rename it. So the top layer, we're going to apply the channel extractor. So right mouse click, effects, 3D channel and 3D channel extract. So we will see the ZDAP information here. So you can go over to the black point and white point to adjust the contrast. So you can control how much of the object is really in focus. Like for example, the extreme white, we can have this totally blurred out, and then this the black area to be in focus. So you can adjust these contrasts. So you can also invert the map, so you can flip where you want it to be in focus and where you don't want it to be in focus. Okay, so once we adjusted the values, you can apply a pre-comp to this ZDAP layer, right mouse click and pre-compose it, and use the second option, move all attributes to a new composition, and click OK. Now for some reason, when I need to apply the blur onto the base layer, only the pre-comp will work. So now I'm going to hide the pre-comp. I'm going to go to the beauty pass layer, right mouse click, I'm going to apply a effect, camera, blur camera effect. So go to blur sharpen, camera lens blur. Right, so once you're at a camera lens blur, you can see the blur effect is being applied to everything across the whole image. We're going to use the ZDAP information, right, to help us designate which area is in focus and which area is not. So to do that, go over to a layer and click on the ZDAP comp. And now you can see the foreground is in focus, okay, the background is slightly out of focus. So you can go over to the blur focus distance, and you can play with the slider, right, and then you can see the effects of the ZDAP, right. So you can flip it around. So now this is the tanks are in focus and the background is out of focus. If you slide the other way around, now it's inverted. Okay, and if you want to adjust the amount of blur, you can increase the blur radius. Okay, please do not push this too much, otherwise you have very weird outline artifacts. And also, if your edge looks a bit odd like that, you can click on repeat edge pixels, okay, to fix your edge. All right, so this is how you bring in the ZDAP, rendering the ZDAP and then compositing it in After Effects. Right now we only have one frame here, but if you have your animation, you can have the entire sequence applied with this ZDAP information. All right, so that's how you use it.